Hi, I'm Gabriel and this is Learning English Path. And in this lesson, I'm going to teach English teachers what they should do on their first day or before their first day of their new job as an English teacher. All right, I have some excellent tips for you today. If you are an English language teacher, teaching English as a foreign language or a second language, and you don't know what to do on that first day when you get a new class, on that very first lesson with a new group of students, right? Maybe you're already an English language teacher and you're struggling with maybe some classroom management issues and you want to know how to set things straight right from the get-go. Or perhaps you haven't even started your job yet, but you have been offered a position, or you are maybe taking your TEFL at the moment, and you want to know what to do on the first day of your new job right when you get there, right? Maybe you're American and you've just been offered a job in China, or maybe you're British and you dream of working in South America, right? And you want to know what that's going to be like on your very first day and what you should do, how you should behave, what you should say. And this video primarily focuses on the first day of a new class, a new group of students. But I do have a couple of tips for you as well for just when you meet the staff for the first time. So let's get right into it. So number one is that when you get there on your first day, remember that you are learning, okay? You're going there. This is particularly if you've never been an English language teacher before. However, also it can apply if you do have some experience, but you're going to another school. Now, no one likes it when a new person arrives at the school and tries to make out like they know everything. Okay, and I've seen a little bit of this in my time as an English language teacher, right? I used to be a director of studies, and every now and again, we'd recruit a new foreign teacher, and they would come in with this attitude of like they were going to change things, right? Like they would observe a couple of classes, and then their attitude would be like, oh, well, I can do it better. I don't agree with what you did here, what you did there. And they haven't even taught any classes yet, right? And so they, these kinds of teachers have they leave a bad impression right away. And you don't want to be that person, right? You don't want to be that new guy or that new girl who comes in and makes out that they can do the job better than their boss or better than everyone else, okay? So come in with an attitude of learning. Even if you've got some experience, come in and you know, maybe the curriculum is not as good as a curriculum you had in another school, right? Maybe the teachers there are not as good as you, right? But try to learn what you can from it, and maybe down the road you can make some suggestions, but don't go in with the attitude on your first day, your first week, probably even your first month as, you know, I'm going to tell you how this is wrong and how what I know is better. All right. That's a huge tip. And I know I've talked about it now for a couple of minutes, but trust me, if you follow this, you're going to be a lot more popular with the staff, the people you work with, than if you go in saying that, I rock, I'm the best, this is not good. Okay. So number 2, now most of these now are for when you actually teach a new class. So this sounds obvious, and this is going to sound like, why even bother mentioning it? But it's very important. Make sure that you check in with your mood, all right? Before you go in to teach a new class or to teach any class, you don't want to go in with your problems and your issues on your mind and have a bad attitude, because students can pick up on that very quickly. Even really young students, like toddlers, can pick up when there's something a little off with the teacher today. Okay, so just to make sure that you've had a decent breakfast or had a decent meal, whatever it is, and that you are fully charged and emotionally ready to go. Right? Because the last thing you want is to go in with some kind of negative attitude and for you not to make that connection that is so crucial on a first lesson, right? It's very crucial that you make a positive connection in that first class, all right? So check your mood. The third tip I have for you: have information about your students in advance. All right, super important. So if you have a PA, they call it somewhere, like if it's kids, you might have a PA, a parental advisor, who is in charge of communicating with the parents in their first language and communicating with them about what happened in the lesson and so forth. Make sure that you find out from the PA or from whoever it is certain information about your students, what they want. Okay, what's important to either the students or to the parents of the students? Do they want to grow in confidence? Do they want more speaking practice? Do they want to focus on their reading and writing? Do they want a strict teacher, right? Or do they want a funny teacher? Do they want a kind teacher, right? These things are important, very important, especially if it's parents, one of these training schools, where parents are paying the school for a foreign teacher to teach the kids. And you want to find out information on the students themselves, whether they have any problems, whether they're confident or shy, how advanced their English level is. That kind of goes without saying, right? You should know the level that you're teaching. So make sure you're aware of that. Try and get an idea. And you might not get all the information you need, but at least try to get as much information as you can. It goes a long way, not just in the classroom, but also with your colleagues. If the people you work with, they know, oh, okay, you're really trying to understand who it is that you're working with here, that's impressive. And that will go a long way in your school and in your company if you work in a company as well. Right? So the next one, definitely be prepared with a lesson plan and with all the resources you need and with extra material, okay? Because if this is your first ever time teaching an English lesson, your timing could be way off, okay? You may have planned an activity to last 10 minutes and it lasts 2 minutes. And then you don't know what to do with that extra 8 minutes, right? You need a lot of extra materials if it's your first class teaching. You need a lot of extra ideas. Come in with a lot of teachers call these like a go-to activities or go-to materials, where if you don't have anything left to do, you've got a backup. You've got some backups that you go to straight away. All right. Have some of those even before your first ever lesson, because you really, one of the worst things that you could be, one of the worst situations that you could be in is like to be standing there with 20 minutes left and not know what to do. Okay. So make sure that you've got backups, and also plan your teacher language. If this is your first time, try and find out ahead of time what level your English learners are, and plan the teacher language in advance very carefully. Hopefully you'll get a chance to observe some classes before you go in, right? Even observe classes with the same students. That would be marvelous. But if you don't have the chance to do that, just try to plan the exact instructions that you will give. Because some teachers go in there with an idea of an activity or a game or an exercise, and they don't anticipate that the students could maybe understand the activity and could maybe do the activity if only they understood the instructions. And then the teacher doesn't know how to adequately demonstrate, rather than explain, demonstrate the activity to them. Okay, so plan that very carefully. In fact, while we're on this topic of demonstrating rather than explaining, that can be my next point. So be ready to demonstrate the activities and the exercises in the class. Don't try to explain the game or the activity without actually giving them a demonstration from all sides. So if it's a 2-person activity, you need to demonstrate both roles of that activity. All right. Don't try to just talk and try to explain, because unless you're dealing with already advanced level learners, it's going to be very difficult in all likelihood. All right. The next one is you need to come to class early. You need to come to class ahead of time. Set up the desks. Make sure they're in the right position. Make sure if you're using a computer and a whiteboard, an electronic whiteboard, make sure that all that stuff is turned on and ready to go well in advance. All right, well in advance. People used to make fun of me because I would get down to the classroom at least 20 minutes before the class would begin, but I knew that it was necessary, because if the computer for some reason was slow, if there was a problem with the whiteboard, and I rushed into class, just 2 minutes before the class started, and all the students were running around, if they were kids, then it would be a problem if I was trying to turn things on as the class was supposed to begin. You need to come well in advance so that you're there before your first student arrives. I promise you it'll pay off in the long run if you have this habit, because you'll get your class prepared. Also, the board, even if you're not using an electronic board or a computer, if you're just using a chalkboard or a whiteboard, make sure that you have it laid out and designed in an appropriate way in advance. Make sure you have all your pens ready. Just make sure you have your attendance list, all the books, just that everything is prepared, all right? And then when the students start coming in, you can communicate with them and build some rapport with them instead of ignoring them and trying to focus on setting things up for the class. Because when the students come in, you want to start building that rapport with them straight away, right? You want to have time to do that, all right? And the next one is names. Names. Focus on names. When I first started out as an English teacher, I was really terrible at this because I was thinking about the lesson, right? Thinking about all of these things to do with teaching the language without remembering the names. And sometimes I would even play a name game with the students at the beginning. But by the end of the name game, I still wouldn't remember any of their names. So it was kind of pointless. And then what happens, you see, if you don't remember their names by the end of the first lesson, now I'm not talking about if the class has 60, 70 students in it. Of course, that's a little bit of a different situation. But if you've got, up to 20 students, make an effort to learn the names from day one, because by the time you get to your third, fourth, fifth lesson with the students, if you haven't remembered their names yet, then you will be a little bit too embarrassed to admit that, and then you won't ask them in the third, fourth, and fifth lesson. And it could get to the point where you get all the way to the end of the course, maybe 24 lessons in, and you still don't know their names because you didn't find out in the first few lessons. You didn't memorize them. Super important. And then that could lead to some potentially incredibly embarrassing situations. So make sure you do that. The next one is about classroom management. All right. Now, by the way, names is very important for classroom management because if you don't know a student's name, how are you going to, if it's a kid, right? How are you going to write their name on the board, right? That option's out the window. How are you going to say, David, stop doing that? Or David, I see what you're doing, right? You can't do that. You'll just be able to say, stop what you're doing. And it doesn't have the same connection, right? It doesn't have the same emphasis. It doesn't have the same power as if you use someone's name. Because when that student hears their name and the instruction connected with it, they're a lot more likely to behave, all right? But even if you're teaching adults, don't forget the classroom management at the beginning, okay? Now, there are exceptions, but like if you're teaching a business class and you got 4 or 5 businessmen who are there to learn business English during their lunch hour, don't spend time on the classroom rules. But in most situations, you want to lay out the rules or the guidelines almost immediately, all right, in the first 5-10 minutes of being in that classroom. And not just the rules, but the consequences, right? What are the consequences for breaking those rules? Does it affect their grade? Well, if they're children, will you tell their parents? Maybe they won't get a game at the end, right? What are the consequences? And if they're very beginners, in English and they don't understand, you find ways to make sure that they understand. You either demonstrate using your actions, or you draw something on the board if it's very simple, right? Or you don't usually want to do this, but for very beginners, it can be necessary to get someone to translate the rules to them. And I promise you that it'll be worthwhile in the end. And consequences, very important to make sure that they know the consequences of breaking those rules, or even of following the rules, right? So you have positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement together. And I've got two more. So get a feel for how much language they know, especially if you went into the class only knowing that it was an intermediate class, right? It's like there are many degrees of intermediate, many degrees of advanced too, and even beginners. You might get told that they are beginner learners, but then in reality, they know a lot more. Or you might walk in and find out they know zilch. They know absolutely nothing, right? So get a feel for how much each individual student knows, if you can, right? Don't make the mistake of only judging the class's language ability based on the top student. All right. This is a mistake that I see many newbie English language teachers fall into. And I did this when I was a newbie as well. You go and you teach a class, and then there's one or maybe two students who always raise their hand, always answer the question. And like you start thinking, wow, this class knows a lot. This class is really good. But then most of the class does not understand everything, right? They're waiting on this one person or these couple of people to answer everything. Or maybe it's not even just one or two, but maybe it's quite a few people, but then you haven't paid any attention to the weakest students. Maybe, you need to become aware of who the weakest students are as far as their English level goes, and who the strongest ones are, so that you don't just ignore the students who are not saying anything, right? Last one. I know this sounds like a lot to think about, and your first class is like a lot of information, but I promise you it'll help you. And then the last one is to make sure that the students get some kind of learning in that first class, so they learn something, and that there's some level of enjoyment as well. Now, I'm not saying you have to make it all games and all super fun all the time. In fact, that's probably not the best thing to do in the first lesson, because then that's what the students will come to expect, okay? And every lesson, and then they'll just expect the games. You don't want to do that, but you want them to have had an enjoyable experience, a positive experience, and to have learned something. Because let's say that they're kids again. They're kids, and then they leave the class at the end, and their parents ask them, "Oh, so how did you like the new teacher?" You don't want them to say, "Oh, it was boring," right? Because then you'll get complaints against you right away. You don't want them to say that they didn't learn anything, although there will be students who say that they didn't learn anything even when they did. But that's just the nature of kids. All right, so I hope that there are some useful tips for you in this video. I gave you a lot, I know, and I'm sorry if it's too much, but I'm just trying to give you some advice based on experience of when I first started as an English language teacher and what I've seen from many others who I've managed and who I have worked with. All right. So hope you enjoyed this lesson. I'll see you in the next. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And make sure you click that bell so that you know when I publish a new free lesson here on YouTube. And if you want to Learn English with songs, then don't forget to click the link in the description to get my free PDF guide to 101 songs to learn English. I have hundreds of exercises for you to study English, English grammar, English vocabulary, English idioms, practice your English listening, and even your speaking while listening to the very best songs to study English with. All right. And when you get it, then you also get my weekly email with 5 words of the week, where I teach you another 5 words every single week so that you continue to take your English language learning to that next level. All right, my friend, I'm Gabriel Wallace. Keep learning and keep going.